The quiet hum of the house was the only sound that accompanied me as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the clock. The faint glow of 2:17 a.m. illuminated the darkness. Maria wasn't home yet. My wife, my partner of 8 years, the mother of our son. And yet, here I was, wide awake, drowning in suspicion and unease. This wasn't the first time she had been out late. For weeks now, Maria had been making excuses, work dinners, meeting old friends, or just needing some time alone. At first I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her. But the inconsistencies started piling up, and the nagging voice in the back of my mind wouldn't let me ignore it anymore. Last week I found her phone buzzing late at night, a text from someone named Paul. She had quickly snatched it away, her face a mask of casual indifference. "It's just a coworker," she said, shrugging it off. But the way her eyes darted, the slight tremor in her voice, it was enough to plant the seed of doubt. Since then my mind had been spiraling, piecing together fragments of evidence that all pointed to one devastating conclusion. Maria was hiding something big. Tonight felt different. The excuses she had given were thin, even for her. "I'm heading out to meet Chloe," she had said, avoiding my eyes as she grabbed her coat. "It's been a long week, and I just need to unwind." I knew for a fact Chloe was out of town. She had mentioned it casually during a phone call a few days ago. But I didn't press Maria. I let her leave, watching as she drove away without so much as a glance back. Now, as the hours ticked by, the weight in my chest grew heavier. The air felt thick with unanswered questions, and my thoughts raced with the possibilities. Was I overthinking? Was I imagining things? Or was my wife really betraying me in the most unforgivable way? Finally, I heard it. The soft click of the front door. My heart pounded as I listened to her footsteps, cautious and deliberate, as if she were trying not to wake me. She was trying to slip back into the house unnoticed, into our bed as though nothing had happened. I stayed still, feigning sleep as she crept into the room. The faint smell of cologne that wasn't mine lingered in the air, and something inside me snapped. Maria slid under the covers, her movements slow and calculated. She thought she had gotten away with it, but she didn't know that I was already a step ahead. She didn't know what I had prepared. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was certainty. And tonight she was going to find out exactly how far I was willing to go. The morning after Maria's late-night return, I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me. Her face was calm, serene even, as she poured herself coffee at the kitchen counter. It was as though nothing had happened, as though she hadn't slipped into bed at 3 a.m. smelling of another man. But I couldn't pretend anymore. This wasn't paranoia, it was something deeper, something real. I needed proof. That day, while she was out running errands, I made my move. Her phone had always been locked, but I knew her passcode, an old anniversary date she thought I'd forgotten. My hands trembled as I picked up her phone from the nightstand. The screen unlocked easily, and the flood of messages I saw made my stomach churn. At the top of the list was Paul. The messages started innocently enough, work updates, a few jokes, but then they turned personal, flirtatious, explicit. My eyes scanned the texts, each word confirming my worst fears. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you," one message read. Another, "When can we meet again?" He doesn't suspect a thing, does he? My breath caught in my throat as I scrolled through the photos. Pictures of them together at a hotel bar, her smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. There was no denying it now. She wasn't just lying to me. She was building a life with him, one stolen moment at a time. But it didn't end there. My curiosity, mixed with a sick sense of duty, drove me to dig deeper. I opened her email, finding receipts for dinners I wasn't invited to, and hotel bookings under her name. Even her bank account showed suspicious withdrawals, money I had assumed was going toward groceries or household expenses. She was funding her affair right under my nose. By the time I put the phone down, my hands were shaking with a mix of rage and heartbreak. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, trying to process what I had just uncovered. The woman I had loved, the mother of my child, was betraying me in ways I never thought possible. And she thought she was clever enough to get away with it. That evening, Maria returned home as if nothing had changed. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, her smile warm and practiced. It took everything in me to keep my composure, to act like I hadn't seen the texts, the pictures, the lies. For Angie's sake, I had to hold it together. But inside, a fire was building. I decided I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation would give her a chance to lie, to twist the truth, to manipulate the situation. No, I needed more. I needed undeniable evidence. I needed a plan. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind raced with possibilities. I couldn't let this go unanswered. Maria had made her choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. Quietly, I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. An old friend, Nicholas, who had always been good at uncovering the truth. "Nick," I whispered into the phone, my voice low and steady. "I need your help, it's Maria." The next morning, Maria was already up and dressed by the time I walked into the kitchen. She stood by the window, sipping her coffee, scrolling on her phone, oblivious to the turmoil brewing inside me. Her calm demeanor felt like a slap to my face. How easily she could lie. How effortlessly she could betray everything we'd built. "Busy day ahead?" I asked, keeping my tone casual as I poured myself a cup of coffee. She glanced up, her expression unreadable. "Just the usual. Work meetings, errands, why?" I shrugged, masking my emotions. "No reason. Just curious." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment, as though she were trying to gauge whether I suspected anything. But I kept my face neutral, unwilling to give her even a hint of what I knew. Inside, I was burning, but I couldn't afford to let her see that yet. Later that afternoon, I met Nicholas at a quiet cafe. He was the one person I trusted to help me unravel this mess. He sat across from me, his sharp analytical eyes scanning the files and screenshots I had collected from Maria's phone. "This is solid," he said, flipping through the evidence. "The texts, the hotel receipts, even the photos. She's not being careful at all." "That's what worries me," I replied, my voice heavy with frustration. "She's gotten so comfortable with lying, she doesn't even bother to hide it anymore. It's like she thinks I'm too blind to notice." Nicholas leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "She's playing a dangerous game. The question is, how do you want to handle this?" I hesitated for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "I don't just want to confront her," I said finally. "I want her to know she can't manipulate me. I want her to see the consequences of what she's done." Nicholas nodded, his lips curving into a slight smile. "Then we need a plan. You can't go into this without strategy. She'll try to turn the tables, make herself the victim." Over the next few days, I played my role perfectly. At home, I was the same attentive husband I had always been, listening to her stories about long days at work and pretending not to notice the way she checked her phone obsessively. Every time she left the house, I knew exactly where she was going. Nicholas had arranged for a private investigator to tail her, and the updates I received were damning. Photos of her meeting Paul, holding his hand in public, laughing with him like they didn't have a care in the world. One evening, as we sat down to dinner, I decided to push her buttons to see how far her lies would go. "I was thinking," I said casually, cutting into my steak, "we should take a weekend trip. Just the two of us. It's been a while since we spent some real time together." Maria froze for a fraction of a second, her fork hovering in midair. Then she smiled. That practiced, polished smile I was starting to despise. "That sounds nice," she said smoothly. "But work's been so busy lately. Maybe next month?" "Next month," I repeated, my voice calm, even as anger simmered beneath the surface. "Of course, You must have a lot going on." She nodded, visibly relieved that I hadn't pressed further, but her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She had no intention of fixing this marriage, no intention of stopping her affair. She was too far gone, too wrapped up in her lies. That night, after Maria went to bed, I sat in the living room, staring at the evidence Nicholas had compiled. I knew the time for subtlety was over. Maria thought she was in control, that she could keep living this double life without consequences. But she was wrong. The trap was set, and soon she would see just how wrong she had been. The morning sun filtered through the curtains as I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop open in front of me. Maria had already left, claiming she had an early meeting. I didn't ask where. I didn't need to. Nicholas had texted me an update minutes after she walked out the door. She wasn't at work. She was meeting Paul at a cafe downtown. Their audacity amazed me. They didn't even bother to hide anymore. The files Nicholas had compiled were spread across my screen. Photos, bank statements, hotel receipts. It was all there, a detailed account of Maria's betrayal. But this wasn't just about proving her affair. I needed more. I needed to ensure she couldn't twist the narrative when the time came to confront her. Maria was cunning, and if I wasn't careful, she'd paint herself as the victim. Nicholas had already laid out the groundwork. "You need to think 3 steps ahead," he'd told me during our last meeting. "She'll try to flip this on you, make you the villain. You need to make sure there's no way out for her." I spent the rest of the morning drafting a plan. First, I reached out to our family lawyer, Richard, a no-nonsense professional who'd helped me with contracts in the past. I explained the situation, carefully omitting the emotional details. This was about facts and strategy, not feelings. "She's been withdrawing money from our joint account," I told him, forwarding the bank statements Nicholas had uncovered. "I suspect she's funneling it into this relationship." Richard's voice was calm but firm. "If this goes to court, that's critical evidence. Keep tracking her finances. And if you're serious about protecting yourself and your daughter, you need to start separating your assets." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Already in motion. Step 2 was securing my home turf. Literally. That afternoon, I had the locks changed and installed a security system with cameras in every critical area of the house. Maria thought she was safe here, that she could come and go as she pleased. She had no idea I was turning this space into a fortress, one where her lies would be exposed. The final piece of the puzzle was Paul. He wasn't just some fling. He was a key player in this game, and I needed to know everything about him. Nicholas's investigator was already on it. By evening, I had a detailed dossier on the man Maria had chosen over me. A mid-level manager at her firm, recently divorced, drowning in debt. He wasn't just using Maria for companionship, he was using her for money. And she was too blind to see it. That evening, as Maria returned home, she was all smiles. "Long day," she sighed, kicking off her heels. She kissed me on the cheek as if nothing had changed, but I could see the cracks forming. She glanced at her phone too often, her movements too deliberate. She was on edge, though she didn't know why. I played my part perfectly, asking her about her day, making small talk over dinner. But inside, I was seething. The evidence, the lies, the betrayal, it was all building toward one moment. I was setting the stage, and Maria had no idea she was walking right into my trap. Before bed, I reviewed the security footage from the cameras I'd installed earlier. She didn't notice them, too preoccupied with her phone. As I watched her type furiously, likely texting Paul, a grim sense of satisfaction settled over me. She thought she was untouchable, that her secrets were safe. But soon she'd realize just how wrong she was. The trap was nearly ready. All I needed was the perfect moment to spring it. The day had finally arrived. Weeks of preparation, gathering evidence, and playing my role as the oblivious husband had led to this moment. Maria had no idea that the foundation of her lies was about to crumble beneath her. I had set everything in motion, and now, all that was left was to watch her world unravel. It started with a carefully orchestrated family dinner. I'd invited close friends and relatives over, including Maria's parents. They adored her and believed she was the perfect wife and mother. I needed them here, not just as witnesses, but to see the truth for themselves. Maria, as expected, had no suspicion. She even seemed excited, greeting everyone warmly, playing the role of the devoted spouse. Watching her facade, I almost admired her audacity. Almost. As everyone settled around the dining table, laughing and exchanging pleasantries, I waited for the right moment. My heart pounded, but my resolve was unshaken. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Angie, about protecting her from the chaos Maria had brought into our lives. Before we start dinner, I began, standing at the head of the table, I wanted to share something with all of you. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. Maria looked up, a polite smile on her face, but I noticed the flicker of unease in her eyes. "What is it, Edward?" she asked, her voice sweet but cautious. I picked up the remote for the projector I had set up earlier. "I thought it was time to be honest about what's been going on in our lives," I said, clicking the button. The screen on the wall lit up, displaying the first slide, a photo of Maria and Paul laughing together at a hotel bar. Gasps rippled through the room. Maria's face paled as she stared at the screen. "Edward, what is this?" she stammered, her voice trembling. I ignored her, clicking to the next slide. This one showed a bank statement with her suspicious withdrawals highlighted. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is where our money has been going. For months, Maria has been siphoning money from our joint account to fund her affair." The room was utterly silent. Maria's parents looked at her, their faces a mix of shock and disappointment. Friends exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure of what to say. This isn't what it looks like," Maria blurted, standing up. "Paul is just a friend. Edward, you're twisting things." "Stop," I said sharply, cutting her off. "Don't insult everyone's intelligence by lying again." I clicked to the final slide. A video of her and Paul entering a hotel room together, time-stamped and undeniable. Maria sank back into her chair, her facade completely shattered. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked around the room, realizing there was no escape. "Edward, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We can work through this. For Angie's sake." "For Angie's sake?" I repeated, my voice cold. "You've been lying to her just as much as you've been lying to me. Do you think she doesn't notice? Do you think she doesn't deserve better than this?" The room remained silent as Maria broke down, sobbing into her hands. Her parents looked away, clearly mortified. Friends muttered awkward excuses and left, unable to stay in the midst of such raw drama. By the end of the evening, it was just me, Maria, and her parents. "You need to leave," I said firmly, standing over her. "This is my house and I won't have you poisoning it anymore. I've already filed for divorce, and I have full custody of Angie." Maria looked up, her face streaked with tears. "You can't do this," she said weakly. "You can't just take her away from me." "I already have," I replied, "and trust me, the court will agree with me once they see all of this." I gestured to the projector, still displaying the damning evidence. Maria's parents helped her gather her things, avoiding my gaze as they ushered her out the door. I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a grim sense of relief. The trap had been set, and Maria had fallen right into it. Now, Angie and I could finally move forward, free from the lies that had tainted our home. As the door closed behind them, I sat down at the empty dining table, staring at the remnants of the evening. The silence was deafening, but for the first time in weeks I felt a flicker of peace. This was just the beginning, but it was a beginning I could live with. The days following Maria's departure felt surreal. The house was quieter, more peaceful, yet echoes of what had happened still lingered. Angie noticed the change immediately. "Where's Mommy?" she asked one evening as we sat together, coloring on the living room floor. I hesitated, searching for the right words. Mommy needed to take some time away, I said gently. But you'll always have me, and I'm not going anywhere. She looked at me, her small face serious. Okay, Daddy, she said softly, before returning to her crayons. Her trust was unshaken, and I silently vowed to never let her down. The legal proceedings began swiftly. Richard, my lawyer, had everything in place. Evidence of Maria's affair, her financial misconduct, and her neglectful behavior. It was enough to ensure full custody of Angie, and the court didn't hesitate. Maria's attempts to fight back were feeble at best. Her claims of wanting reconciliation fell flat in the face of undeniable proof of her betrayal. When the verdict was delivered, granting me full custody of Angie and significantly limiting Maria's visitation rights, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But it wasn't over yet. Maria's lover, Paul, had become an unexpected complication. Nicholas had uncovered additional information about him. He wasn't just a desperate man using Maria for money. He had a history of manipulating women for financial gain. And now, he was attempting to involve himself in the custody case, claiming he had a right to influence Angie's life. This was where I drew the line. One evening, as I was reviewing documents with Nicholas, a knock on the door interrupted us. I opened it to find Paul standing there, his posture smug, his expression cocky. "We need to talk," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Paul smirked. "You think you've won, don't you? Taking Maria down, getting custody of Angie. But you don't realize who you're dealing with. Maria's not done, and neither am I." His words were meant to intimidate, but they only solidified my resolve. I crossed my arms, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You're right. I do know who I'm dealing with. A man so desperate he uses women to stay afloat. But let me make one thing clear. You have no place in my daughter's life, and if you try, you'll regret it." Paul's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered. "We'll see about that," he said, turning and walking away. That night, I finalized the last step of my plan. With Nicholas's help, I filed a restraining order against Paul, citing his attempts to interfere in my family's life. The evidence of his past behavior, combined with his financial dependence on Maria, made the case airtight. The court issued the order within days, ensuring he could no longer come near Angie or me. As for Maria, her life had unraveled completely. Paul abandoned her as soon as the restraining order was issued, leaving her with nothing but mounting debts and a tarnished reputation. Her attempts to reconnect with Angie were met with skepticism by the court, which demanded she attend counseling before any visitation could even be considered. For the first time, she faced the consequences of her actions without anyone to shield her. With the chaos behind us, Angie and I began rebuilding our lives. We created new routines, filling our days with laughter and love. The house felt lighter, brighter, no longer weighed down by secrets and lies. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Angie leaned against me, her small hand resting on mine. "I like it when it's just us," she said softly, her voice filled with contentment. I smiled, my heart swelling with gratitude. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." The road ahead wasn't without challenges, but I knew we would face them together. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy us had only made us stronger. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. This was our fresh start, our chance to build a life free from lies and filled with hope. Months passed, and the storm that had once consumed our lives finally began to settle. Maria's presence had dwindled into the occasional legal update or a strained request to see Angie. The court had been firm, supervised visitation only, and even that was contingent on her completing counseling sessions. True to form, Maria's efforts were half-hearted, and the limited interactions we had only confirmed that she was a shadow of the woman I once knew. Angie, however, blossomed in the absence of chaos. Her laughter returned, her curiosity flourished, and the shadows of confusion and uncertainty that had lingered around her were gone. She thrived in the stability of our new life, and her resilience inspired me daily. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Angie handed me a piece of paper. "I made this for you, Daddy," she said, beaming with pride. I unfolded it carefully, my breath catching as I took in the drawing. It was a simple picture, just the two of us, standing in front of our house, holding hands under a bright sun. Written in her wobbly handwriting at the top were the words, "Just me and Dad, forever." Tears stung my eyes as I hugged her tightly. "It's perfect," I whispered. "Thank you, sweetheart." Life had found its rhythm, but the past had left scars. Late one night, as I sat alone in the living room, I received a text from Nicholas. It was a single message. "Thought you'd want to know Paul skipped town. Looks like he's running for more than just us." Attached was a link to a news article detailing a financial fraud investigation. Paul had been implicated in a scheme that had cost several people their savings, and authorities were actively searching for him. I felt a grim satisfaction reading the article. He had thought he could manipulate and take advantage of people, but his actions had finally caught up with him. It was poetic justice, and it brought a sense of closure to that chapter of my life. As for Maria, I heard bits and pieces through mutual friends and the occasional report from Nicholas. She had moved back to her parents' house, a far cry from the life of independence and excitement she had sought. Her relationship with her parents was strained. They couldn't reconcile the image of the loving daughter they once knew with the choices she had made. Alone and financially ruined, Maria was paying the price for her betrayal in ways I never could have imagined. One day she reached out to me directly. Her message was short and desperate. "I've lost everything. Please let me see Angie. I'm trying to be better." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Angie deserves stability, and that's what I'm giving her. Prove to the court that you've changed and we'll talk. Until then, focus on fixing your life." She never replied. The final step in our journey came a few weeks later when the divorce was finalized. As I signed the last of the papers, I felt a sense of liberation. The weight of Maria's betrayal, the anger, and the heartbreak, it was all behind me now. Angie and I could finally move forward without any strings holding us back. To celebrate, I planned a small getaway for just the two of us. We packed our bags and drove to a quiet cabin by the lake, a place where we could leave everything behind and focus on the present. The days were filled with laughter, hiking trails, and roasting marshmallows by the fire. At night, Angie would fall asleep in my arms, her face peaceful, her small hand clutching mine. On our last night at the cabin, as we sat by the lake watching the stars, Angie spoke quietly. "Daddy, do you think Mommy's happy?" The question caught me off guard, but I answered honestly, "I don't know, sweetheart. But what matters is that you're happy. That's all I care about." She nodded, leaning her head against my shoulder. "I am happy. You make me happy." In that moment, I realized that the battle I had fought, the heartbreak, the revenge, the endless nights of planning, had all been worth it. Angie was safe, loved, and thriving, and nothing else mattered. As we drove back home the next day, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. Angie and I would face it together, stronger than ever. This was our fresh start, our chance to write a new story. And this time, it would be one of hope, resilience, and unwavering love.